This podcast discusses sexual violence and other material listeners may find distressing. Please look after yourself as you listen and feel free to switch off at any point. You can visit withyouwecan.org to find help, but remember to call 000 in emergencies. We're recording on the lands of the Gadigal, where sovereignty was never ceded. We recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to experience the ongoing impacts of colonisation, including disproportionate rates of sexual violence and institutional harm. We pay our respects to elders past and present and commit to advocacy that does not replicate the harms it seeks to address. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Victim survivors live in a constant state of the unknown. I know that because I've lived it. Shrouded in secrecy, silenced by process, we're asked to place our faith in a justice system that was never designed for us, at the most vulnerable moment of our lives. But I won't stand for it. We're cracking this system wide open so you and everyone around you understands what it actually means to navigate the legal system after sexual violence. I'm Sarah Rosenberg, Executive Director of With You We Can, and this is what no one told us. Nicole Meyer is a victim survivor of abuse perpetrated by Malka Leifer and a dedicated advocate for survivor awareness and systemic change. Drawing on her lived experience, Nicole speaks about how abuse is enabled by silence, particularly within religious and insular communities. She's committed to raising awareness of the complex realities of sexual abuse, including the underrepresented issue of female perpetrators. Nicole's advocacy is grounded in the belief that education and awareness are essential to prevention. She works to challenge stigma, encourage open dialogue, and promote more informed and compassionate responses to survivors, especially in environments where speaking out can feel impossible. Nicole amplifies voices too often unheard through public speaking and peer support. She stays connected with survivors worldwide, both in person and across digital platforms. Her work aims not only to validate survivors' experiences, but to empower them. Currently studying law, Nicole is focused on using her lived experience alongside legal expertise to drive meaningful reform and strengthen the way the justice system responds to survivors of sexual abuse. Nicole, thank you so much for being here for this episode. The advocacy you're doing is so important, and I'm really happy that we can bring some awareness to it. So thank you for being here and making the journey.
Thank you for having me on.
Before we get into your experience with the legal process, can you tell me who you were at the time that you first engaged with the system?
I was a young mum of 3 very young children, so 3, 2 and 1-year-old. And I walked into the police station completely dissociated, no support, completely alone. I didn't even have my partner with me go in to give that first statement as a support person, and found out I was pregnant with my youngest on that day. So really in the trenches of very young children, working full time, no help with like cleaning or any kind of help at home. So running the house alone as well. And that was my first entry into stepping out of anything I'd ever known to go and try and get justice. My whole life revolved around a very small, very, very small, I don't know the word, I've lost the word, but very close-knit. And I went to school and I grew up in a very abusive home as well. A lot of family violence, a lot of abuse happening. So school was my safe place. I loved to learn, loved to read, was always scoring well and doing well because I loved and just wanted as much as school would give me, I took plus more. By the time I got to year 9, year 10, which was like the further end of high school, the school brought in a new principal. That new principal was Malka Leifer. She didn't come in as a principal though, she came in first as a teacher. So to get a fresh, brand new face from another country was quite unusual. And also she was so charismatic and so kind and so caring and just all over the place. So it was like everyone was drawn to her very quickly because she had this magnetic personality that you just wanted to be in her orbit for various different reasons. As well, she had a tremendous amount of knowledge, which is what drew me to her. To this day, I can remember the things that she taught me because she had that much knowledge to give coming from how she grew up. And the fact that she started to groom was, again, not seen as grooming by anyone really because she was different. So that was part of her difference. It was part of her care. It was part of her kindness. It wasn't seen as grooming yet.
There's also something with female perpetrators and the role of nurture and caregiving roles and how that can really muddy perceptions of the people around who might be able to intervene, but also of who it's happening to.
Absolutely. There is a very deep understanding that needs to really increase an awareness around female perpetrators, how insidious it is because it is covered in the very nature of what a woman is seen to be. And that is how the grooming occurs, through all the things that a maternal woman does with the care, the love, the giving, and all of that. And that's how Malka groomed so well, but also, like I would say it, hidden in plain sight, meaning you can look back and there were so many obvious signs, but it was just so normalized because it was a female perpetrator. And that is how she entered my life. She caught me at a very vulnerable state, very closed, very insular, absolutely no knowledge or any sex education whatsoever, or abuse. It took me years to figure out I was even being abused at home, that I was different to my peers. So she caught me at that very vulnerable state where I was desperately wanting to be cared for and looked after and liked, but at the same time had no idea the damage that I was and abuse I was walking into. And also school was my safe place. So she was in my safe place, the place I loved the most, because my home was so painful. So school was the place where I went to have a refuge from that.
What age were you when the abuse started, and what age were you when it ended?
I was 15 and a half when she entered my life, so the beginning of year 10. So the grooming would have started straight away. And then I was 22 when she left the country.
How, you've spoken about you didn't have sex education and the community is very insular. You know, there's not a lot of internet surfing or just general, I'd say, communication about these sorts of things. How did you realise that your sisters shared similar experiences to you?
The most explicit example is a camp that Malka had run, and Malka abused me when my sister was sleeping in the same room. She thought my sister was sleeping, she wasn't. And then the next morning, Malka shooed me out of the room and stayed in there with my sister. And that was the very silent understanding we had without any words. And that was it.
Did you each individually decide to report, or did you decide together? Was it a group decision?
No, it wasn't. My youngest sister gave first in February, then the next sister probably around August. And then it took me a couple more months to think. I didn't realize what a huge step it was to step out and do that. I was still working in the school that I was being abused in. I was still very much a part of the community. So to step out and make that statement was like doing the most crazy thing I had probably done in my life until then. And so that's why I probably was that dissociated. Like I just went and gave the statement and then went back to work as if I hadn't just done something enormous.
Yeah. You'd already lost one safe space, being school. But your community was also a safe space. Speaking out against them or someone in the community who was very respected would have been terrifying, risky, with a real fear of backlash. How did the community respond?
I would say the main response has been silence, and silence is incredibly damaging. And silence is something I've actively been working to break, because I know how damaging that silence is and still is for me now. So there was complete silence after I gave my police statement. I don't even think I told anyone.
Wow, really in the trenches. What did you think justice was going to be? I'm sure you had an idea about what might happen when you went to police.
In my naivety, because I've reflected on this a lot, I thought it was a very simple process, giving a police statement and picking up the perpetrator. I did not think anything beyond that. I don't think I even realized how grueling it would be to give the police statement, how I would feel after, the amendments that might happen, which meant a police coming to my house to do signatures over and over again. So I had no idea, but I really thought it was very simple. Statement and then pick up the perpetrator and then court.
And was there anyone explaining the process to you as it was unfolding?
Absolutely nothing. I had to figure everything out completely on my own, and I did that because I wanted to always know more.
That was like me as well. At what point did you realise that decisions were being made without you, without your input?
I think the first time I realised that was when the incredibly kind detective that we had, who took our statements and collected evidence, went to the campsites, took pictures, all of that, suddenly dropped off, and we got an email from a new police. And I was like, who is this person? Why is this person in here? And then I had to call the police and say, is this the new person in charge of our case? Can we have a meeting with them? Can we catch up? Because this is already months away that, according to the first detective, papers went to Canberra, she's going to be picked up. Nothing's happening. No one's telling us anything. So then I took it on myself to keep emailing, and I have proof of all those emails, every police, every couple 2 months, find out what's happening, what's the next step. They hardly gave me any information. And I felt that if I didn't email, if I didn't ask, I wouldn't receive any information at all. So the little I got was better than nothing, but it was still almost nothing.
So she was charged for crimes committed against you and your two sisters. And we know, and some people listening might know from the documentary, that there was a very, very absurdly long process of waiting for trial. How did you keep yourself distracted or perhaps engaged in that process leading up to trial, those years spent waiting?
Only the driving desire for justice, knowing that if justice happened, because the perpetrator, Malka, was so determined not to return, not to face justice, if justice happened, it wouldn't just validate our story, but it would also make sure she wouldn't hurt anyone again. So that is what kept, I had this fire within me that no matter what we went through, the end goal was justice. So justice, I literally lived for justice for years and years through everything.
And while you spent those years waiting and advocating for her to be brought back to Australia, you couldn't talk to your sisters about each other's statements, could you?
No, of course not. We knew that probably from the fact we all gave our statements within the same year. I was the last one. It could be the detective then told me, don't talk to your sisters about anything. And that's how I kind of knew. But it wasn't, I don't remember it being a very clear directive, but somehow we all knew to never talk about each other's abuse or instances, no matter how much time we spent together trying to bring her back.
Yeah. But you would be accused of that down the track, of colluding, of tainting each other's memories, of, sharing evidence. Yeah.
Yes, that particularly was a bad one for me. I was accused of reading my sister's statement, which I never did. So that was a hard one.
Yeah. And they're big accusations that are thrown back. I mean, we talk a lot about how the accusation against an alleged perpetrator is a really big deal and is taken really seriously, and absolutely it is. But at the same time, some really awful things are thrown back in complainants' faces. Even the accusation that you are lying or making up your evidence is really confronting. I don't think people hone in enough on that. It goes both ways. So we're going to fast forward to the trial. Can you talk us through the moment you found out? This was really difficult in the documentary to watch. Can you talk us through the moment you found out the charges had been reduced?
I remember this so clearly, and this is a part of why I so badly want to get into the legal system and help survivors through it. When the QC came into the room, she said to us there were 74 charges. It actually went up to 92 because I gave additional statements. And she said the jury will be overloaded, so the charges have been reduced down to 29. And she came in with this stack of papers and she said, I don't want you to focus on how many each of you got, because the main thing is we're going to try and bring Malka to justice, and this is the way that we think we have the strongest case. No conversation with any of us about how we might feel about that. She sat down and she gave me 5 charges, and I had the most years of abuse out of the 3 of us that were up for trial. Just 5. already then I was shocked at how invalidated I felt and how they shrunk 6.5 years of abuse into 5 charges, which was essentially 6 weeks and 1 whole cumulative year. That was it. And my sisters got a whole lot more. But I didn't say anything, and I wish I did, but I didn't know I could. And I didn't know I could even question that. I was told I couldn't. So I accepted that. A week before trial, I received a phone call, and of course my therapist was going on leave, and that phone call came in the last 10 minutes of her session. And the phone call was that they're sending me a new statement, and there's going to be parts whited out, not just parts from the day I got married onwards, but even parts where I had been to a doctor with Nicole Meyer before I got married, and she came with me because she was that intrusive, and a lot of other corroborating evidence that would strengthen my case. For whatever reason, I still don't fully know, it was removed. And I just remember feeling like if I couldn't be any more invalidated if I tried, because it had already felt like my whole abuse was already so constrained to such a small amount of charges, and therefore contextually not enough information given. And now even more context taken away and more corroborating evidence that proved how much Nicole Meyer was in my life, and the abuse was complete. It wasn't just these very clinical 5 charges. It made me feel like, in essence, I wasn't saying my truth, which is so weird, but it felt like if you're denying my truth, then I'm not being able to say my truth. And further than that, I remember for the first time ever saying to the prosecutor, I don't know if I can do this. And I sent a very emotional text back to the prosecutor that, in a way that I never speak before. And I wasn't like swearing or angry or anything. I was just so upset that I was again being denied further and further instances of abuse that would just make my case a strong evidence of what I had been through. And it was awful. I felt very shaken from that. I felt like I didn't know how I could go through the trial. And also upset that why did they wait till a week before? If those legal arguments were happening 6 months before trial. We were already moved out of home, and not many people know this, in August 2022. The day before trial was supposed to start on the 2nd of August 2022, the day before, they pushed off the trial to February. We had already prepared, we had already had conversations. It got pushed off because of the pre-trial arguments were too long, and there wasn't enough time to fit that and the whole trial. So then to get a week before February charges reduced when they already had those arguments in August, that was very detrimental to my mental health and my ability to feel strong enough to go to trial.
It's pretty extraordinary that there was literal years spent leading up to this moment, and then they haven't prepared enough, or they haven't had these conversations. And if they have, you have not been a participant in them. Like, it's seriously extraordinary the way, you know, justice delayed is justice denied. And I think people just think, well, you're not talking about the trauma right now. You're not giving testimony right this instant. So this is fine. The girls will be fine. It's really extraordinarily ignorant, because you are actively trying to keep your memories at the front of mind so that you can give your best evidence. And your healing is actively being halted, and they can just flick it down the track just like that. As you've explained, it wasn't just that hugely significant, not only contextually for the rest of the abuse, but in and of themselves, hugely significant experiences of abuse were crossed out just like that. But also, even for the charges that were proceeding, they were erasing memories, erasing your context and your truth. How do you dissect an experience in the way that you were being asked to speak about it? How do you categorize and censor yourself? And, you know, I just don't even know how you can prepare for something like that. How did you do it?
I knew that if I said one word that I wasn't allowed to say, it would be mistrial. That was at the forefront of my mind. The worst part of it was the defense lawyer could go where he wanted and get no and yes answers from me. But I wasn't allowed to say any of that in my evidence in brief. And that is such a imbalance of rights in the legal system.
How can you be questioned on evidence or information that you didn't even get to speak to in your chief? It's like, it is really extraordinary. And people don't know the ins and outs of this. You know, they've heard that cross-examination sucks and that's the most of it. And yeah, it does, but actually it's kind of the least of it. There are so many factors around it, and it's so much deeper than that. A defense barrister, it's their job to make you feel bad. You've spoken a lot about defense barristers and I guess the terrain over which they can reign when they're questioning you. Do you think there is a fair way for defense barristers to do their job while still, I don't know, operating with human dignity?
I think anyone that defends sex crimes has lost their moral compass a long time ago. That's just my personal opinion. But let's say they can. So I would simply think that a defense lawyer can do their job by testing the evidence. Do they have to put forth that many times that we are lying about the evidence? I don't think that's necessary. It chips away at our very soul to hear that question being asked so many times. I understand that just as the prosecution has to ask if all we said is true, they have to ask if we have lied one time. One time maybe, that's it. And as well, the behaviour of defence lawyers in court. Why can't they sit with dignity and respect like the prosecution does during their cross-examination? Instead, you have a defence lawyer, as we did in our case, and I know other people as well, who pull every trick to distract the jury while the prosecution is walking through evidence. Shuffling, snuffling, sniggering, paperworking, talking to his associate, the associate female, and it got to me because she's female. Why isn't she not supporting us females doing the same? That kind of behaviour, why is that not contempt of court? Whereas if we had any external show of emotion or we dared to be a little bit more activated, we are in contempt of court. We need a break. We have to come back and be more composed. That, again, that imbalance is so far outweighed on the side of the victims and more for the side of the perpetrator. It makes no sense.
Where is the line between doing their job and causing harm?
They will do harm with their job regardless because of the position they're in. The way they behave, the attitude they have can go miles with how the victim feels the cross-examination has gone. No one will ever feel good with cross-examination. It will never happen. But defense lawyers, they can hold on to some moral compass of a way to treat a victim, even if they are representing a perpetrator. And so far, I've not heard of many that do.
I think as well there's national legislation in place that is meant to stop invasive, humiliating, belittling questions that are causing distress. What question isn't doing that? You know, like how can people just say, well, there's legislation in place? Because it's totally subjective. And again, no one advocates for the victim. So who's the one that we rely on to speak up and intervene? What kinds of accommodations were you expecting in court that didn't happen?
Probably the biggest one is being able to sit in court when I finish giving my evidence rather than being told it might not look good. For who? We've given our evidence. And then to have the defense lawyer hop up and down because he didn't want us watching the trial like on screen in a different level in the courtroom in the same room because we can't talk to each other was, again, him asserting his power in a space that was absolutely not necessary. Malka was behind a screen as requested, but just as I was about to start giving evidence and be sworn in, she made a fuss like anything to get a screen to watch me behind the screen. So they weren't going to push off, so they're running around getting a laptop to hook up behind her screen so she can actually see me while giving evidence all the time.
It's disgusting. It's just another form of abuse.
It's another way to play and show that she's the one in power and in control. And that's what I felt the whole time and throughout the entire trial. She knows, and I'm sure other perpetrators know, that they're not the one on trial. They can sit how they want. They can have breaks when they want. They can even call out and speak something and not be called in contempt of court, where we can't do a hair out of place or we are in contempt of court. So that was something that was very, very noticeable to me. The judge. Have to be very careful what I say here.
Yeah.
But The judge could have been more humanistic.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it there.
Leave it there, yeah. Implies a lot. You'd say humanistic, I think, is a good word for it. Can you take us to the moment the not guilty verdicts came back?
Okay. First not good sign. The jury came in and didn't look at us. Not a single one. Not a good thing. Second not good sign. The judge came in and gave a warning that there cannot be any outward displays of emotion or any unsettledness or anything to disrupt. Obviously, he knew. And when the foreman stood up, the room was so quiet and it was packed. But for some reason, the only sound I can hear is papers, tick, papers, cross, papers, tick, of the journalists who don't realize that my entire life has just been devastated. But for them, it's a tick and a cross. And they're doing their job. I so get that. So I don't hold it against them. But it was just so impactful because of how quiet the room was. Hearing not guilty was a shock. There's no other ways to put it. It was an enormous shock. It didn't make sense, even if I had half mentally prepared for it. Nothing made sense about that not guilty. It just, thank goodness she was guilty on charge 6 and going forward, because there was guilt attributed to her and she deserves to be where she is. But receiving not guilty put me on a whole different trajectory.
There's a video of you in the documentary, speaking into your phone about how you want to feel happy for your sisters and you want to feel that you are a part of that because you are a part of that accountability. But a not guilty is a not guilty. And it's devastating. How did you pick yourself up?
That day or going forward?
I
struggled. I struggled a lot. I was able to do media the whole next day and I was really strong. Then I flew to Sydney and for the festival. But then it comes to the hearings before the plea hearing and all of a sudden I can't give a victim impact statement. I am completely removed from any legal processes that go after court, after one does receive guilty. And that for me was even more heartbreaking and devastating.
Not being able to read your victim impact statement.
Turning up to court and feeling like I was a fraud, that I didn't belong there, that I had no right to sit in the courtroom, that I was not acknowledged for being a victim, that I could not stand up and speak the impact of what she had done to me for so many years. It was horrific those 2 days. Like it was the most even more painful than the verdict day, because that one was more of a shock and then the pain came after. This was knowing I was not going to have a space at all anymore in the legal process.
So your legitimacy as a victim you felt was tied to the verdict. And even though we know that isn't true, you're really made to feel as though it is culturally, but also in this, post-trial process.
Yes.
If you had had a lawyer whose role was to represent you, where would that have made the biggest difference?
The amount of charges, primarily, and possibly pushing for, I know they say it's biased to bring in a court expert around association and trauma and memory, but that is not always the case.
We've got the Australian Law Reform Commission has recommended it now.
But prosecutions always go for the side of fear, that it will look like they're going to bias the jury and then it can be an appeal issue or defense issue, and they don't. But in a case like ours, where it can be compared to a high control group or a cult, a religion, where the understanding from the general person is not there, from the courts is just not up there yet, how much more helpful would have that been for the jury to understand how Markalifa operated and how she abused us at the age we did. So even to push for that kind of representation, that would have been extremely helpful. Potentially even just someone to give feedback, sit in court, because the prosecutor can't say anything. The social worker can't say anything. They're not allowed to talk to you those 3 days. So I'm reflecting myself and I'm like, okay, but where could have I improved a bit, or maybe somewhere that I was looking too confident, or that's what I still think sometimes, or or could have explained something better. So if we had someone that was there solely to help us, the victim, we would be backed up, because we're not. We're just a witness for the state. We're operating alone. So to have that personal person just for us, advocating for us, would be so helpful pretty much at every step, I think, but primarily the ones that I just said.
I think even when it comes to not just aspects where they can represent you or advocate for your interests, even someone to tell you what's going on when you are having to constantly chase for answers.
Yes, I do 100% agree with that, because I know that we came with all the right questions. We had done legal processes in America and in Israel beforehand. So we knew everything to ask. We knew what to push for information. But the average person who goes to court and has not had will know nothing. And that's a lot of the support work I do, where people will send me screenshots from their detectives of their police and say, what do I do? How do I reply? What's next? Can I call again? When is it a good time to call? Because they're left in the dark and they just don't know what to do next.
And so fearful of looking bad or doing something that will sabotage the progression of the case, because that's how, it's not even just how you're made to feel, it's how it is. Like you have a hair out of place, you sneeze and the whole thing falls over. Meanwhile, the accused they're just entirely in control, whereas the victim has zero agency. Do you think independent legal representation would have changed the outcome?
Definitely. Without a doubt, because even if all they had done was petition for my charges to be increased because I had that many more years of abuse, just giving me a much better chance. Like, I almost got the prosecution to admit to that after, that they didn't give me the fairest chance to get guilty simply because of how they positioned my charges. Yeah, absolutely, I do.
The bulk of the charges that were dropped were experiences of abuse at the hands of Mark Khalifa after you were married. Why do you think that is? Why do you think the prosecution made that decision specifically?
I think it really boiled down to consent. And just because the abuse continued past the age of 18 or post me being married does not mean I suddenly consented to the abuse or that I allowed it to happen. But because there's still such a lack of understanding about abuse or consent understanding happening at this biological age of 18, then the prosecution chose to stay safer so that the defense couldn't then use it as a point of consent, essentially derail the entire case. The issue is that Mark Khalifa was a predator in every possible way. It did not make a difference to her that I was married. She assaulted me on the day I got married. Whether I was pregnant, had a child, her abuse did not get defined by an age, because abuse is not consensual. So it didn't matter whether I was 18, 19, 20, 21. The abuse continued as it had started when I was 15 and a half. But somehow the courts are not up to that understanding yet. And so they stopped it literally the day I got married, even though the defense still somehow managed to sneak it in a question to evidence I never was allowed to give.
It's just bizarre that we can acknowledge that you weren't consenting as a young person when your whole life has been defined up until this point by grooming, by this predator, and then suddenly you turn 18 and you have a role in it. Did you feel like you were being blamed, or did you understand why they were doing what they were doing, as frustrating as it is?
I will 100% say I feel like I was completely misunderstood and being almost accused silently for not stopping the abuse. So basically, and I've said this to you before, even the judge himself saying in his closing that I allowed the abuse to happen is indicative of how little understanding there was already of what I had said in court. Now, he said that specifically to me, not to my sisters, because like I said, the defense did sneak in that I was still going to Mark Khalifa's house and, working with her and liking her and all that post my school years after 18. So that sentence alone really indicated to me the lack of understanding there is around abuse, around female perpetrators, around the damage of abuse post the age of 18 or altogether. it was incredibly hurtful to hear that comment, because statistically, judges' closing impacts jury decisions. There's articles written about that, and the evidence is there. And again, back to the imbalance or the unfairness of the legal system, that is not transcribed unless there is an appeal. So I can't even contest that. So for those who don't know, the entire court process is transcribed. The judge's closing is the only thing that isn't, unless an appeal is lodged. So here I am left in a limbo of not being able to contest a comment that potentially had a very damaging effect on the outcome of my charges.
You and your sisters made the astounding decision to have this process documented. How did you have the foresight? What led to that?
We didn't. We had no idea what it actually meant to go through trial, as much as we thought we did, because we had legal processes until then. But we had committed. We had committed because we wanted to shed a light on what it's like to go through trial. And we are adults who have been through childhood abuse. Imagine children that have to go through that process. And I do really wish that there was a documentary just done on those 9 weeks, because the amount of footage, and I had people say to me after they would have loved to see more of court, but they had to fit the whole story in 90 minutes. But it was being mic'd up and speaking and really allowing the vulnerability and the rawness and the pain just be filmed day in, day out, going through trial, coming out of court, walking in, walking out, debriefing after the few videos we shared of the impact of it. We all felt at that point that it was hugely important for the world and for other survivors to have their experiences validated on screen, that people can see what it's like to go through, not retrospectively to talk about it, but what it's like to go through trial. And I still really want that footage for myself, because it was 9 weeks longer footage. It was huge. And I feel such a little bit of that was put in the documentary, but enough that people can understand that no matter what age you are, or how long it's been since the abuse happened, or how confident or how not confident you feel, there is no perfect victim. There is no perfect trial, never. The healing and justice does not only come from the legal system. So it was very important. It felt very important to do so.
You've chosen to study law now. Why?
Law was a passion of mine that got really quashed when I was very young, because I didn't have those opportunities, and I almost forgot about it until we finished the trial, and I just realized there is so much I can give to this system. I've been through it. I've been through multiple different legal processes. I want to study law so I can get in and give to the survivors what even my incredible team didn't quite give to me, from the lived experience perspective and from knowing the sticky points where a survivor is left floundering and feeling like they have no choices because we have so little choices. I want to get in there and push the line up to the point where I'm told no. But like even something simple like talking to the judge post-trial, why not? I don't care if the defense is running after me. Talk with me. I want to be able to talk to the judge as a prosecutor after trial and give them feedback. There's no line that says you can't, yet no one seems to do that. So I have all these ideas in my mind of what a prosecutor can do in this space, and I hope I can impact that change and be that person.
What do you hope for future complainants?
I hope that future complainants will feel empowered through the process rather than just being a sideline and barely spoken to. I know a lot of work has to happen for that to happen, and I think legal representation would help a victim feel more empowered through the whole process. That is, I think, the biggest takeaway I would want, that as much as I thought I knew, I still didn't. And this is coming from someone who was very educated and what we had been through and what we had learnt. And I just think of all the survivors who go through it completely alone or with little support, and how disempowering the process is at a time that you are meant to be empowered, giving your story, saying your truth, receiving justice. So that is my biggest hope, that somehow there is a way that victim survivors can feel empowered going through the process, as traumatizing and as difficult as it is. The second biggest hope I have is real rigorous training for judges and defense lawyers. And I would say prosecutors as well, because some are really awful. So I can't leave them out. We were just lucky that we had some pretty good ones, but a lot of people don't. So, but training that comes from lived experience, not training that comes off a paper of what looks good and should be okay. That's not good enough. There has to be someone who's been through it, sitting in the room, talking one-on-one with the judges and really getting them to understand their role. Same with defense, same with prosecution, so that the whole process does not have to be as re-traumatizing as it is.
Absolutely. And we know the Australian Law Reform Commission has recommended training, but of course judges separated, it's like church and state. It's not mandatory. They can't recommend that it be mandatory. Not that the recommendations themselves are mandatory for states and jurisdictions to take up, but judges hold so much power. They hold biases just like everyone. If not more so, they might be people who are attracted to power.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, and I guess all we can do is incentivize it. It would make an enormous difference.
Absolutely.
If someone listening is about to enter the system, what's the one thing you wish they knew?
The one thing I wish every victim survivor would feel or know is that your story is your truth, and it doesn't matter what is said to you, hold on to that, because you know your experience, you know your truth, and going through the system, all the different things that can come at you, whether prosecution taking things away or changing the way that they want you to give your statements, defense questioning you, hold on to the fact that your truth is yours and no one can take that away from you. Because if you do, that will keep you going through the whole process, no matter how awful it is along the way.
Reminds me a bit of something Chanel Miller, who wrote the book Know My Name, says about the whole system is designed to doubt you. And she says when she received guilty verdicts, these yeses were raining down on her, and it's like it was so validating, but it was telling her something that she already knew but had forgotten through the process, that this was her truth.
Absolutely. And that's why I think even myself receiving not guilty, I would do it again. 2 reasons: because I know my truth and I know it's true. And second, because it holds perpetrators to accountability. Even if there's no guilty at the end, they've been held to account and we've had a chance to hold on to our truth. So I would do it again.
Incredible. Can you tell me a little bit about the context in which you grew up and how you met Malka?
Sure. So I grew up in Melbourne, Australia, in a very closed community where my whole life was home, school, synagogue, community, but nothing else. So no external activities unless they were run by the school, no external camps unless it was run by the school. But when I left the school a couple of years later and went to work at another school and was actively starting to be more known as trying to get Malka back, and then obviously campaigning and going to Israel 4 times, the silence continued. And that silence cuts deep because the community is beautiful, giving, they're incredibly generous. And I will always hold the community in grey, and I won't ever be black and white because I live and I grew up in that community. It was my life. The school, teaching there for 10 years was the best years of my life, despite the abuse happening for part of that. But when it comes to abuse, like many communities, it's very hard for communities to know how to step up and support survivors. So they choose silence, which silence is agreeance. Silence is damaging. Silence hurts. And silence is betraying. To know that, and to still know today, that the whole Gordon Street where Malka lived for those years was silent and didn't come to support us in court, didn't give evidence, didn't make the case strong. And I can list so many people that didn't. That silence really hurt my case. I would say even me personally, but hurts any other survivor victim that ever wants to come forward, because they'll know that even if the backlash is not with words, it's through actions or inaction. And that's what's happened in my case.
Yeah.
And I've been actively working to try and change that because I don't want others to go through what I've gone through.
For people listening, they can, of course, watch the documentary on Stan, but also listen to the full unfolding of what happened in the Case Files episode, which we'll put in the show notes. I'm so appreciative of you being here. I know we could talk for so long about the nuances of what needs to change and what did and didn't unfold in front of a jury. You know, there's so much that happens behind the scenes, and there's so much that happens behind closed doors, even within the courtroom. I can't thank you enough for coming and speaking out so boldly and eloquently. It's rare that people shine a light on female perpetrators. It's rare that someone goes through an experience as long and winding as you and your sisters did. And I'm so lucky to be next to you and learning from you constantly.
And likewise, I'm so glad that we've met, and I look forward to whatever work we can do together in the future. So thank you.
If you've listened this far, you already know something most Australians don't. Victim survivors are the only people in sexual offence trials without their own lawyer. That doesn't have to stay true, but justice systems don't change because they quietly evolve. They change because people understand them and demand better. Go to withyouwecan.org to be a part of that demand. This has been What No One Told Us.